Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for getting together for our social entrepreneurship panel. Louise, thank you very much again for inviting me to come. It's a fantastic event, and congratulations on getting a very interesting crowd together. It's actually interesting. We had about 30 minutes sitting together before the panel came up on stage, and we were chatting about some very interesting things, and I'm hoping we can revive some of those. I want very much for you to take part with questions as well, though, so I want really this to be something in which you can really participate. Jack, I'm going to ask you to come this side, because Kevin was going to join us a little bit later, and he can scoot on the end there without walking across everyone. Thank you, sir. So one of the things I'd like to do again is get everyone taking part as much as possible, but I will throw out a few ideas with our initial questions based on some of the things we talked about. One thing I always like to do is try and illustrate some of the things we talk about through stories I've heard. And I was trying to think, there was a story of entrepreneurship I'd heard from some time back where a man living out in the Wild West, when things were all still a little up and down, I guess it was the first real example of social entrepreneurship I'd heard of, but he had, or entrepreneurship at least, he actually went into town to buy a donkey. And a man was in town trying to sell his donkey, so he said, "This is perfect, I'll buy your donkey. How much?" He said, "It's $100. He said, $100, that's quite a lot of money. He says, "Yes, but it's a great donkey," and so on. So anyway, he bought the donkey. He said, "I haven't got it with me, I'll deliver it tomorrow." Now, unfortunately, the donkey died overnight. So when the man met the seller, he said, "Where's my donkey?" He said, "I'm sorry, the donkey died overnight." He said, "Well, I guess I get my $100 back." He said, "Unfortunately, I was in town to pay bills, and I used that $100 to pay off my bills. I don't even have the $100. The guy was very upset. He said, "Never mind, just bring me the donkey." He said, "But it's dead." "Doesn't matter, just bring me the donkey." So anyway, he delivers the donkey to him. A few weeks later, they met again in one of the bars in this old Wild West town. The guy said, "I'm really sorry about what happened with that donkey. I didn't mean to steal any money from you or anything. It was really an innocent thing. The donkey just died." He said, "Don't worry about it. I made nearly $500. He said, $500 off that donkey? How? He said, "Well, I held a raffle in town. I said $2 a ticket for this donkey, and I sold 250 tickets." He said, "But the donkey was dead. Didn't anyone complain?" He said, "Yeah, the guy who got the winning ticket, but I gave him his $2 back." So it makes you realize what is possible. Let me kick off the conversation before I get thrown out for bad jokes. Just in the interest of going down through order. This is Kevin Jenkins. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. I know you were stuck in the traffic coming in. I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions. Jack, actually, with you sitting next to me here, let me start off first with the issue of some of the things you've had to go through in making social entrepreneurship a reality. Now, I know what you said is there's an issue you've had in dealing with bureaucracy, and that can be a huge obstruction when trying to achieve something. Tell me about your experience, or tell us about your experience, and how you managed to get around some of the issues.
Well, I think that if you want to make change happen, and change happen fast and with some impact, you have to use, in my opinion, some non-traditional techniques. Because if you go straight and just say, "Here's my proposal to a government," say it's a government kind of change you want to make, chances are it's going to have a lot of excuses as to why they can't do it. Otherwise, it probably would have been done. And so we found is that we have to have like a little toolkit of some guerrilla techniques that sometimes work their magic. I'll just give one case study, if I could. Here in New York City, we worked on a project to change out all the taxi cabs to hybrid cars and clean cars. And initially, the government was quite resistant to make this happen, didn't want to do it. So we did two guerrilla techniques I'll just share with you. One was we commissioned a poll of New Yorkers saying, "Would you like to have clean cars in X, Y, and Z?" And then we leaked that poll to the New York Times, and suddenly there's a huge story in the New York Times as to why New Yorkers want this. And the guy who was initially against it suddenly testified the next day why he's for it. The same guy is on record saying, "I'm against it," and then "I'm for it." What also helped, though, at the same time we did that, is I gave a lot of my staff very large rolls of $5 bills. And they looked like drug dealers at that point. And I sent them to Lexington Avenue and 28th Street. Does anyone know what that is? Lexington 28th, what it's called? It's called Curry Hill, because that's where all the cabbies come and they rest, and they get food and things like that. And I asked all my staff to go out and take 200 to 300 rides a week in taxi cabs for $5 each in order to explain to the taxi cab drivers why this was a good idea. And so by doing all these different rides again and again, we actually reached more than 10,000 drivers of the 40,000 drivers. So that's an example of, and we did that at 10 p.m. at night, by the way, to get them. So that's an example of kind of these guerrilla techniques you have to use to then convince a large government that there's outside pressure to make this happen.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jack. Nancy, I want to ask you about the way DBL Investors, your company, works, because you're looking at delivering a financial return. And of course, people, when they have a focus on that, don't always think about the social return or the social responsibility factor. And I know you say that one of the things you do is try to instill a sense of that social entrepreneurship and responsibility early on. How do you do that?
Well, entrepreneurs want to change the world. They have aspirational focus on making the world a better place. They obviously want to be successful. They want to do well. They want to make a difference and be visible at it. So it isn't as hard as you might think to get them to think more broadly about what changing the world means, so that you can infuse a sense of community, a sense of giving back, a sense that your constituency is more than just your customers, more than just your suppliers. It's the community, the public around you. And so what we do with our companies, and some of the companies we financed include Tesla Motors, Bright Source Energy, Revolution Foods, companies that are really building brands in their respective spaces. We help them navigate. When Tesla went to the DOE to apply for a loan to help it come out with the electric cars, the incumbent industry was imploding, and Ford and GM and all the majors were going to Washington trying to get money to save them. And so what Tesla did, and very much to your point, Jack, really made some noise, and we said, you know, you can't just save the industry that is based on fossil fuels. You have to give some of that money, if you're going to do that as a policy, to those that are developing the industry that will not rely on fossil fuels and will reduce climate change, greenhouse gases. And that was an audacious thing to say, and that a young company like Tesla should get $500 million, but it worked. And because there's a rationale for it, it's embedded in policies that we share and that the government is trying to implement in terms of climate change. So Pandora Media, the online music company, adopted a school in Oakland where it's located because the school had no music budget. And what the employees of Pandora like to do a lot, is because many of them are musicians, is to teach music. So they adopted a school. The absenteeism went down. The employees loved it. The superintendent loved it. The kids still talk about it. They've been doing this for 3 years. And the Pandora employees learned a lot about how young people relate to music as they helped rebuild that community around the school. And then in the ultimate victory, where you kind of get that aha moment, when the company had to fight a royalty battle and make sure that their business model worked, they had to go to Congress and get lower royalties paid so that artists could really benefit, but the listeners would not have to, the company would not have to pay too much of a royalty and therefore make no money. The company was able to go to its mayor, Ron Dellums, and its congresswoman, the head of the Black Caucus, Barbara Lee, and they weren't music aficionados, digital music aficionados, but they had heard about Pandora helping the school in a low-income section of Oakland. And they said, oh, you're that fantastic company that's helping our children. We don't really understand your business, but we're going to help you because you're the kind of company that we want to support. Right. And so fast forward, the Digital Music Act was passed, and the royalty was worked out in a way that balanced the needs of the major labels with the up-and-coming sort of more democratically accessible music, digital music.
I'll get on to, thanks very much, because I'll get on to some of the stories and how they may be applied to other businesses in a moment. We'll need your advice on that, or your suggestions too. Martin Warszawski, you're basically dealing with something very different. When I said that Jack had to deal with bureaucracy, you have another difficult issue to deal with, because the areas of the world in which you work have the issue of corruption. And tell me, when you're trying to do something positive, you're trying to do something that's helpful and build that social structure that will benefit so many, how that corruption gets in the way?
Yeah, well, in the case of, basically I'm originally from Argentina, then I lived maybe a third of my life in Argentina, a third in the States, a third in Europe where I live now, and I build local and global businesses, and then there's my foundation, which acts in Argentina and in Chile. So I have had problems growing Pfund, the company that I'm the CEO of, and is the largest Wi-Fi network in the world, in less developed countries because of issues of corruption, which I'll explain in a moment. I had also, Educar of Argentina, my foundation, is now an $800 million project, and it's been a big success. Having said this, at some point, half of the money of the foundation evaporated, and we had a significant issue with mismanagement and corruption before we were able to refloat and sort of sort things out and eventually have this money reappear. Because what happened, I donated $11 million to create Educar, and this seed money, which ended up being, as I said, the seed funding for what today is an $800 million project, at some point was deposited in Argentine bonds, and then because it was an Argentine project, but then the government of Argentina defaulted on its obligations, including to my donation, right? So I had a contract with the government of Argentina that the money was to be used exclusively for education, and it evaporated in the default. That was later on fixed by the government repaying that money, and then actually much more. I'm not saying it's not possible to do things. Argentina is growing at 10% this year, and there's a lot of wonderful things happening in Argentina. We also did Educar Chile, and in Chile we found absolutely no problems with corruption. But what I haven't found is a way to sell we sell millions of our Wi-Fi routers and hotspots in Europe, USA, Japan. We haven't been able to do this in many countries around the world because what we do, which is both an enterprise and has social value, because building Wi-Fi networks is something that everyone likes, to have Wi-Fi everywhere, because of just simple issues of corruption, like getting the routers through customs, getting special approvals for Wi-Fi routers that are ridiculous because they're already approved almost everywhere else. And what is one country going to discover about these Wi-Fi routers? It's just obstacles to the growth of a business or a social enterprise that both my foundation and my business we try to deal with, but they are there. And when a lot of people talk about improving the state of the world and helping a lot of these countries, that, like my native Argentina, frankly, those countries have to also learn to help themselves and change some rules which just hurt themselves and people who are trying to help them.
It's interesting you mentioned that in one case it was a simple bribe of $1,000 to the customs to get a few thousand routers in, and yet, on principle, you wouldn't do it. How disheartening is it?
Well, actually, the person who asked for the bribe has finally I went public. When they asked for the bribe, I went public in the Argentine media, and I said, this is incredible. We're just trying to import this. And the head of customs asked me to rectify what I said or to sue me for calumny, for defamation. But then it seems that he did this so frequently that he was caught with somebody else and he was destituted and so on. And so in the end, the story had also a happy ending with this guy apprehended. And there is hope for things to get better. But at that point, we didn't pay the bribe and we sent all the routers back to Europe. Because for a company like ours, I mean, Google is our investor, and British Telecom, and Sequoia, and Index, and a lot of people say, well, that's the way things are done. But it's not the way things are done if you're going to do something which is not only a crime in the country you're in, but a crime in the country you come from.
Monique Villa, your Thomson Reuters Foundation helps to set the foundations that allow for social entrepreneurship to grow. Explain how you provide resources that allow people to tap into sometimes very crucial information.
Okay, so just to follow up on what you have just said, which is really interesting, because corruption can be fought really efficiently only through transparency and through information. So I will come back on that after. But yes, indeed, we have created, we have launched in June, so exactly 3 months ago, a website that is called Trust Law. And Trust Law is a website with 3 functions. The first function is Trust Law Connect, and it's to connect lawyers around the world. And when we launched, we were covering 140 countries. Lawyers from big corporations who also want to do pro bono work, with NGOs that the Thomson Reuters Foundation vet, because we have a great experience with NGOs through a website that we have, which is the first humanitarian website, bigger than the one of the UN, which is alertnet.org. And with AlertNet, we have 450 NGOs members, which benefit from many information and from many services that we are able to bring. And so Trust Law connect lawyers with NGOs, with social entrepreneurs. And the social entrepreneurs, I cannot vet them by myself because, or anybody in the foundation, because we don't know if this entrepreneur has still the need of a lawyer for free, or if he is already a millionaire and that doesn't need it any longer. So the social entrepreneurs are vetted by the likes of Ashoka, Grameen Foundation, Skoll Foundation, Schwab Foundation, Echoing Green, and many, many others. So they are the ones who say, yes, this social entrepreneur can benefit from your services. And the third category of beneficiaries are government in need of legal advice, but who cannot afford it typically after a conflict or after a natural disaster. So what happens is that on Trust Law Connect, we first make sure that it is a legal need that these potential beneficiaries have, because it's not always the case. They don't know very well how to express. As it is very global, not everybody has a perfect command of English, so we help them formulating their request in order that the lawyers don't waste time with people not understanding what they want. And then we do a lot of hand-holding, but in the end, it is the social entrepreneur or the NGO who choose the law firm he wants to work with. And we have many, many law firms around the world. So some who have done pro bono, because it's very interesting. The pro bono concept and the pro bono practice is very well understood in 5 countries: US, UK, Australia, South Africa, and Canada. In other countries, you have a lot of pro bono done, but very ad hoc. I know this NGO, I'm going to help them. And in other countries, you don't do at all. So the goal of creating this market is to spread the practice of pro bono worldwide. And so to do that, the website has also 2 other layers of news and information and a database of laws and best practices, etc. So the journalists of the foundation, and I have 15 journalists, and this is growing next year, do stories both on pro bono and on the first vertical of information we have created, which is anti-corruption. And anti-corruption for the reason that we have this humanitarian website. And when you know that half of the money that should go to aid don't go into the right pockets, you think there is a problem. And when you discuss with the biggest player in the anti-corruption world, they tell you that there is no international hub where you find all the information about this issue, which is a major issue, and especially for the developing countries that we help. And so we have RSS feed from Transparency International, from Revenue Watch. I mean, they're all part of that website now.
I'll ask you how you bring these groups together more and how people can tap into them in a moment. Kate Johnson, let me get you in with Right to Play, because you face the challenge of often being in areas, as Monique was saying, you know, where there's perhaps a post-conflict situation. You're often dealing with trying to mobilize interest and activity in places that are suffering from deprivation, poverty, disease. How do you fit in? Because a lot of people think, well, hey, isn't sport a luxury?
Yeah, that. I think the biggest thing, you know, at this level, at the NGO fundamental grassroots level, you have to get into the communities. One of the primary goals of Right to Play is sustainability. So in order to ensure that the programs are lasting, are working within the country and within the environment of which they've set up, they have to actually work with local organizations, ministries of education, and really spend the time understanding on the ground what this specific area needs. So, you know, if you're in a war-torn area, you have to understand that environment as different to another environment that might be dealing with a change in government. one thing that Right to Play does that's absolutely critical is that they focus on training the locals to actually run the program. So, there's three pieces. There's working with the local governments, the local ministries, various stakeholders, business owners, to support the organization and to ensure that, there's a constant dialogue going around about what it takes to ensure that these programs are contacting the right children, are working within the system the way they need to work in order to reach the children. But then on top of that, the second layer is actually training and coaching the locals to be the facilitators. They ultimately are the role models for these children. So in order for Right to Play to go in and to actually create a lasting impact, they really do have to focus on who are their role models, and the best way to do that is start within the community. A lot of times, Right to Play is in these countries. Right now, they're in 23 countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And the goal isn't to be there as an organization forever. The goal is to ensure the Right to Play programs are running in these countries and are being run by the countries for as long as possible.
In many cases, it sounds like in many cases you're creating almost surrogate families for people who don't have that kind of emotional and support structure as well.
That's true, and I guess I would give an example to that. I went to Ethiopia with Right to Play as an athlete ambassador, and we visited 10 different organizations, and no two organizations that we visited where Right to Play programs were taking place were the same. So we visited the marginalized, we visited, you take for granted how you handle disability in a different country, or how we handle disability in our own country, and then you apply that to how it's being managed in societies where economics are totally different. And in this example, we visited a home for the disabled. They had been completely marginalized, were essentially before Right to Play showed up behind closed doors for all intents and purposes. And the way Right to Play managed this was they first started with hiring a coach who himself had a disability and could serve as a role model for these children, and who they would actually listen to, because that was the way to actually engage them. That was the way to engage their families and to change the stigma around letting disabled children out of the home. And really, so they changed more than just the children's lives. They changed young adults' lives as well, and the fact that now they had this idea, I could be a role model for those coming behind me.
Kevin Jenkins, World Vision Foundation is well established. It's global. It's got a lot of reach and has a lot of experience. I wonder, with the sort of current economic global downturn, how much you've seen the opportunity for developing social entrepreneurship damaged?
No. If you think of donations, donations from major donors went down in 2009 and a little bit in 2010, but have rebounded reasonably well. But more importantly than just dollars, there's a bit of a change going on in the world, and it's not just for entrepreneurs, which you might typically think of entrepreneurs, people who own their own businesses, but also for larger organizations, global organizations who want to show to their employees, especially their 20 and 30-something employees, that they have values. I think of social entrepreneurship in three buckets. I think of basic microfinance, which we do about $400 million of a year around the world, and mainly with women, and permitting women to get away from moneylenders and actually have their skills valued and and women invest almost all the money they make back in the family, so it has this great multiplier effect. So microfinance is one. The second is entrepreneurs, people who own their own businesses and can do what they want. There are good things and bad things about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs want control. So there has to be a way to find a partnership with an NGO, to get on side with a country strategy. And we've heard a lot about corruption here. We work with the poorest children in the world. If we bailed on every country that had corruption, a lot of people would die. And so it's not an option. And now we don't take our money through government, but entrepreneurs are worth working with because they're creative, they change the game, but it's so important for sustainability that a bunch of Westerners don't show up, fix everything, and leave, because that's not sustainable. And then the last group, and maybe in some ways the most exciting group right now, is these global organizations who kind of have been out of the game. They've had these CSR, community support functions. They put a few $1 million a year to work. write it up on page 10 of their annual report. And that's really changing now into social investment, and in a way where we've got a number of examples around the world that they've been engaged and looking for a way to actually, if not make money, at least break even. So it's gone out of, well, okay, we've got to throw a bone at this small amount of charitable thing over here. So it's really changing in an exciting way. The reason I was late today, I was trying to get from here to the UN, and part of what we were doing was we had a 2.5-hour session on private sector support of the Millennium Development Goals. And the room had 250 people in it, almost all business people.
Well, let's get our participants to also ask some questions. You've heard firsthand the stories now of our various panelists, and they're very diverse stories, very interesting experiences they've had. And hopefully I can tap into some of the questions you have regarding the various areas. So if you have a question, please put your hand up. I'll try and see you across the little bit of light that's in my eyes here. But if you have questions, please put your hands up and we'll get the microphone to you. Thank you, sir. Tell us who you are as well, please, and where you're from.
Hi, Alan Goodman at the Institute of International Education. On the corruption issue, does the existence of the Transparency International rankings and ratings help, and do you find something like that reducing corruption in the places that, for example, you're working?
Kevin Jenkins, yeah. I was going to ask Kevin Jenkins to touch on it first. Go ahead, sir.
We increasingly as an organization are trying to think more and more about what causality causes leaders to act in the best interests of all the people in their country and also future generations. And Paul Collier has written a lot about this on how in so many countries the resources that should be shared with all the people, and there are ample resources, particularly in many African countries, end up just getting coalesced around an elite. I think the rankings maybe will become more important than they've been, only because corporates, entrepreneurs and large corporates, cannot operate when there is no rule of law. And so that'll be a bit of a grid for them to decide where to engage and where not to engage.
All right, Monique Villa, you.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial what Transparency International and some others do in that field, because as I said, if you fight against corruption, you have to spread the information. And so transparency by its ratings, but by all they do, just help to, in a way, name and blame, or name and shame. And this name and shame thing is very important, because this is the way that, in countries, as you said, you refuse to pay the bribe, and then the guy, after 3 times where he tried, was finally arrested, etc. So I think there is a lot to be done, and that information in itself is considerably important. At the foundation, we have also a very big program, which is training of journalism. And we train journalists since 28 years around the globe. This is the Reuters mission at the highest standards. And we train them on many, many different things. But now that we have this program on anti-corruption, we have a special training on how to cover corruption. So we are going to do that in Ghana next month. And we are going to do it in many other countries. And if you think at the time where investigative journalism is going potentially down the drain, because when you cut costs in newspaper, the first thing you cut is what is very costly, which is investigation that you publish only 1 month after, and you know that well in Jazeera or in others. And if you can train locally, the local journalists to how you identify or how can you show that there has been corruption here or there, you can help you can help transparency, and I think everything we try to do is that.
Martin, you want to add something?
No, I think overall in the world, the trend is towards greater and greater transparency, and I am optimistic. Having said that, it's like, a rising stock market. Some stocks still go down in a rising stock market, and there are some areas, for example, Latin America, Venezuela, some countries that are going in the opposite direction of a general trend towards transparency. Overall in Latin America, I think there's been tremendous improvement in many areas, certainly the area of free press, and in my own activities, I've seen it easier and easier. And the internet has been an incredible force for transparency. The internet, all the accounts being reported on the internet, like publishing what you're doing, the fact that anybody on Twitter or anywhere can bring down an organization by denouncing, the ability to stay anonymous and actually declare that something that's being done is corrupt or wrong. So the trend is good. Having said this, there's other ways of doing business in this planet. For example, with all respect to the Chinese, and Pfund does a lot of business with China, and we buy a lot of components in China, but we've had subsequent Spanish managers who we send to China to buy equipment. We source things in China. And many times the Chinese companies offer bribes to our employees. And because in the end, it comes to a very close decision. You have two suppliers, this maybe $10 million contract here, $10 million contract there. Unfortunately, at least I heard some stories, maybe my employees have some cars somewhere that I haven't heard about, but generally my employees come back and they say, you know, now it's between these two companies and they offered us bribes. And it is common, obviously, among the Chinese to offer these bribes at the last level of a supplier. Well, it was very common for American companies to do the same until legislation was passed here that said that if you do that, it's not a crime there, it's a crime here, right? And so American companies used to do this all the time. European companies still do this.
In France, just one second, in France, until the OECD charter entered in vigor, when you were bribing a company to get a contract, you could deduct it from your taxes. So, you know.
So you see, so the trend is towards improvement, but it's still, so the Chinese are where we were 10 years ago, but I think the Chinese will change too. And so I think the trend is good, but that doesn't mean that, and there'll always be some corruption. There's obviously some corruption here in Europe, but it's about levels. That's why transparency doesn't measure. It's called transparency. It's not called like clear sight, you know. So there's always some level of non-transparency, you know, but you hope it gets better.
It's translucency.
Yes.
Let me see if we have any more questions. If the hands go up, please, sir, go ahead and tell us again who you are, please.
I'm Jaime Cuevas-Thermodi from Black Tie Magazine. I'm the economics editor. And I just wondered if you're facing this on a regular basis where you say your employees come back and they all have the same story, had you ever thought about when there's several, 3 or 4 companies in China that are trying to get your business, that you give it to the one that doesn't offer you a bribe and then announce that you paid 11 million instead of 10 million and this is the company that didn't offer you a bribe?
Well, we had a situation where we made it very clear to them that our employees don't take bribes and that if they are pricing in any kind of bribe in the supplies to us, they shouldn't, because the best bidder, the best quality, and the best price will get the contract. I think it is not something that they do to the point where you cannot do business with them, because you can always say no, and you just don't take the bribe. But I am concerned. I tell my fellow entrepreneurs who do business in China, I said, watch out the person who's buying in China, because whoever is buying in China is getting offered bribes all the time. You know, and I spoke with fellow entrepreneurs. I mean, I don't want to get very personal here, but say top tech entrepreneurs and say, if somebody buys for you in China, change them every year. I don't know, at least they steal for a year. But it is very tempting for the people who work there, if you're the person in charge of spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars or euros in China.
Especially when it's cultural there and not seen in the same way. Before we get to question, Nancy, I know you wanted to throw in something on this.
Well, I just wanted to say that there are some problems. I mean, multi-million-dollar contracts in these countries that require, just as happened in the United States, legislation. I mean, there needs to be engagement with the political system. There are ways, though, to get into developing nations without having to go through that, and it really has to do with the social entrepreneurs that start at the village level and then grow from there and develop a culture from the beginning. One woman that we are following engineer from Stanford who developed an LED light that's powered by one little solar panel, and she's bringing the cost down to, you know, $16, and then it'll be reduced from that. And she is working with Tanzanian entrepreneurs in villages that charge cell phones, because she can also turn this into a cell phone charger, and with families that need that light so that their children can read around the table at night and not use flashlights or kerosene, which obviously has huge health hazards. And what she's doing, she and her team, she's working with each village and developing contracts and showing how the village will help, everyone will benefit, and people will increase their standard of living with the revenues from this product. But they're all dependent on one another. And while there will always be bad actors, this approach allows you to build it from the bottom up. And I think you need to do both. I mean, you need to work on policies, but you also have to engage and rely on the optimism of small groups and the desire of people to better their lives for themselves and their children.
Okay, please.
I was struck by the contrast in the panel between, on the one hand, guerrilla tactics that were first introduced and perhaps an antagonistic relationship or competitive relationship with government. And on the other hand, with Jack, what you said about the need for entrepreneurs to work as partners with government. So how do you bridge that divide between the competition on one hand with government not necessarily listening to the needs of the public to put in place good projects, as well as on the other end the desire to work in partnership, in harmony, as you will, to achieve these goals? How do you?
Yeah, it's a spectrum. First of all, he's talking about New York, and I'm talking about the developing world. So that's the first part of the spectrum. And it's partly why an organization like Transparency is so important. So in the developing world, if we try to hold governments account, we're just going to get kicked out. So we are better off to make sure, in our case, for example, that they have a good maternal health plan and a good child health plan, and that there's some strategy there that has some legs to it. On the other hand, so that's a kind of a working with government strategy. On the other hand, there need to be organizations that are holding governments to account. And I would say, obviously, once you get into a free democratic society, which is in the Western world and is basically healthy, then all gloves are off. But it's all very location specific.
And Jack, I wonder, because you use obviously very clever tactics in a particular field, but can you think of other areas we can apply the same kind of guerrilla tactics to?
Yeah, also I think it's not either or. Often we do both. So in the case of education, we have a partnership with the government, in that case, called National Lab Day, which is a great partnership of lots of different players. But even there again, one of the questions I guess I would put out to the audience and to the panel is, what's your theory of change? What makes change actually happen? Because I found a lot of social entrepreneurs, they're just so eager for their idea to get out there, they just go and just, like a rabbit, go running out for the carrot, as opposed to saying, let me take a step back for a second. What is my theory of change? When do I think things will actually change? And I'll just give one or two case studies, which is, let's say you were a social entrepreneur in 1959, and you said, I really want America to be more engaged in science and math. Let's say that was your social entrepreneurship goal. Well, sure enough, you've been slogging away for years and years and years, and nothing happens, and suddenly Sputnik goes up. And bingo, this entire country goes science and math crazy. We want to send a man to the moon. JFK makes a big speech, and we engage math and science like we've never seen in this country. So crisis in that particular case, spurred by the Sputnik launch, created this situation where massive change can happen very, very quickly. And that's part of what I think is the art and science of being a social entrepreneur, is to say, if we can find, for example, some crisis moment, either external or manufactured. In the case of, for example, Don't Ask, Don't Tell right now is a crisis right now, this moment in this country. It didn't have to be. There's no external force that made it so. But right now, it's at a crisis moment in Washington, D.C., and it will be decided in the next weeks, as it were. So I think that, my advice to social entrepreneurs is sometimes use guerrilla tactics, sometimes engagement, But step back a second and say, what is your theory of why change is going to happen? Is it a crisis moment that's going to make it happen? Is it engagement and partnership? What is going to be the theory upon which you actually, your hypothesis rests that change is going to happen? And then test that theory many different ways.
Nancy Martin, before you chip in as well, I also want to ask Kate, what's come up here is how the media can be utilized too. And when you're working in an environment where the media is often limited, can't access everyone there, how do you make the most of, if you like, creating your own mini crisis to get people interested?
Well, it kind of goes back to actually your very first question, which was why sport? I mean, the thing about sport is that it doesn't see color, it doesn't see disability. It is at its most fundamental level, it is fun. And it is what keeps kids coming back to programs. What we do with Right to Play is we use sport as a way to take current issues within the community, within the country that the program is existing in, and we use that as a vehicle. We use sport as a vehicle to transmit those lessons to these kids. So whether it's AIDS and HIV awareness, whether it's self-confidence for young girls, sport at its most basic level is just fun. And when it comes to getting involved with organizations and schools, there's no real threat that comes with sport. Sport doesn't come with any real threat. I mean, if anything, if you're working with the right organizations and you're empowering young individuals to actually be the leaders of those organizations and to be implementing those programs, then you've kind of hit all the marks as far as ensuring that those programs will exist and will stay.
Nancy Martin, I want your input. Nancy, ladies first, please.
Thank you. It's a really good question because social entrepreneurs have to engage the policymakers, and yet they may disagree with the policy. And what we have found is that it's a push-pull. You have to develop your credibility before you go in and make certain demands. But if you can get the media engaged and rally the troops, then you're in a better position. One company we've funded called Revolution Foods, it's two women out of business school, and they serve hot, healthy lunches to low-income school children in California and now Washington, D.C. and Colorado. They're spreading nationally. And they do it at a price point that the government reimburses through the Nutrition Act, which is a paltry $2.68 for a lunch. I mean, this is sad that we only pay that much for nutrition for our kids when we have obesity and diabetes as epidemics. But that's the policy. And these women have been able to make it happen. They're serving 40,000 lunches a day. It's often the only hot meal these kids get. But they're struggling because it's hard to serve a nutritious meal for that price point. And so what they've done is they got publicity. They've been in Time magazine. They were invited by Michelle Obama to the White House garden. So they slowly got the visibility, and then they went for it. And they saw that the Nutrition Act was up for extension and was being amended, and they said, we need to spend more on our kids, and we need to raise that price. And they got bipartisan support because they had shown the benefits of what they had done. But they didn't ask for that support right at the beginning. And so I think it's important to show that you have credibility, that you're out there working with the system as you try to change it.
Martin, you wanted to add something?
No, I just wanted to say that it depends what the subject you mentioned before. Do you cut corners to make a profit as a business? No. Do you cut corners to deliver life-saving medication? Maybe, because it really depends on what your ultimate goal is. If you are facing a humanitarian crisis, you're trying to deliver aid very quickly, and somebody is standing there asking for $1,000 or whatever, it is a very different question, to me, ethical. Never mind legal, but it's a different ethical question. But and if you're so legalistic, maybe you never get anything done. Or if we were really legalistic, or let's say China is a very good example. China may have a lot of things to change, but I was in China in 1988, and it's a completely different and much better country now. And I think we should cooperate, work with China. I mean, it would be ridiculous to disengage because Falun Gong or I don't know what. But it has to be a steady pressure on our values, on what we believe in, a steady message, a consistent message, which of course Europe and United States complicate a great deal by committing their own Fallujah, Garb, and all these atrocities and all these things that in the end make the message, the history of American participation in Latin America is also very confusing with horrible incidents, the murder of Allende. So nobody's really so clean and so, nobody has the right moral flag. I think it's for all of us to work together in something we believe in, but to try to strive for a certain order and transparency that we want to promote, because we think it will benefit all of us.
Okay, do you want to chip in something?
Yeah, I
quickly,
just wanted to follow up. I guess on the other side of Right to Play is that they actually do use the media to make sure that their programs are known and they're heard. And they've used the media both to give props to the country that their programs are operating in, to give props to the governments, to the local stakeholders that are allowing these programs to take place and to enable them to succeed. And they do that by actually using very high-profile athletes. So the organization was founded by an Olympic athlete, Johan Olof Kaas, who he actually found, and his key learning came from after winning his medals at the Lillehammer Olympic Games. He used the media as his one moment to actually communicate to the world what he wanted to focus his attention on. And he had the world in that moment. And that other athletes have actually looked at that model and looked at, okay, so what is important to me, and use that to then use their 15 minutes of fame to actually draw attention to something very important to them. It was followed by Joey Cheek after the Torino Olympics, who was one of our US speed skaters. And what that in turn does is it then brings a real credibility to these programs when those athletes are actually speaking about something that they know about, that they can speak very educated, that they are very, they have all the lessons in place. They visited the countries, they've seen the programs in action, and in turn, that allows them actually in the countries that the athletes are from too, to leverage higher relationships within government. Because, as I say with sport, it's something that you really can communicate across a number of different channels on.
They trust the speed skaters to break the ice,
Yeah,
so to
right.
speak. Oh, did you have a question back there? I didn't see it. Did you have your hand up? No, good. Okay, sir, you had a...
Yeah, I'm Joseph Wambia from Wambia Capital Group, formerly of the World Bank. I want to second what Nancy Pfund and some other speakers have mentioned about the genesis of corruption and how the business model and the development model affects the incentives. In my experience in development, one of the real big challenges that I experience across the world, not only in Africa, but also in Asia, is that it's very hard when big business comes into a poor country and promises or offers to invest a phenomenal amount of money. When you hang around a few $1 billion or a few $100 million of promised investment, you trigger a series of behavioral responses that are entirely predictable. The second thing big business does is they announce their intentions long before they even have any realistic plan of implementing the intention in the country. So the flies begin to fly, to swarm long in advance of the investment. So bribes are obviously demanded, and opportunities for rent. People in these countries are not, they may be poor, but they're not stupid. And they see opportunities for rent the moment you announce it. Another behavior that I spend a lot of time at the World Bank dealing with corporate and government people is the consistent desire to be exempt from the tax or licensing or laws of the country in order for you to invest. So you come into a country and don't you realize we're going to invest $1 billion in XYZ? So we want you to waive and suspend or cancel the following 200 regulations or licenses or fees. Well, if you don't pay taxes and licenses, how will children go to school if the government is not going to get revenue from your investment? And we've sat across tables with big business who say, well, this business is not going to be viable unless you waive sales tax. And the link I put with Nancy's comment is that in many countries, particularly poor countries, successful foreign investment has started at the bottom, right, where business has come and invested at a micro level to test the model, engage the locals, work with them, deliver benefits at the ground level, and then work up. When you do that, you hardly need to see the Minister of Finance.
Right. That's an interesting, very interesting point you make, and perhaps, Martina, I can put this to you and ask, is there a way to get past, I mean, you're working at huge scale. Is there a way to get past some of those huge scale plans you have and work at a level where you can go in at a grassroots and build from the inside?
No, the negotiation you're talking about is not only with less developed countries. I want to say that even inside Spain, where I live, some regions of Spain fight each other for investment, and corporations play them off against each other to obtain lower taxes or tax breaks for 8 years. Or so that is a practice that if one was going to question of multinationals, it could be questioned at a global level, or it could be at the same time you could have the opposite view, which is sort of a unionized view of the receiving nations. They could unionize themselves, and they could say, look, we have to pay for school, we have to, so we're not going to compete at the level of not providing the basic necessities of our people just to get your investment. So I see as a double combination between companies, which obviously are trying to maximize profits, but governments, which sometimes engage in unhealthy competitions in order to attract these investments. Now, having said this, I think that it is overall the effect of multinational corporations, in spite of all the negativity, overall it is positive in the sense that they do bring technology, and they do bring generally a lot of know-how that was not available in that country. Now, a general proposal that I would have is that what less developed countries need above all, and what my foundation has exclusively focused on this, is better education to compete globally. The internet is extremely helpful for that. But the other thing that helps a lot is like foundations like Endeavor, or foundations which work a lot on training local entrepreneurs to work with global standards. Now, maybe we should have a world without borders. America, for example, Europe is without borders, but America, NAFTA keeps the Mexicans in Mexico and so on, which is unusual for us. We've taken the risk in Europe of having all the Europeans move, and some people said that Great Britain was going to get full of Polish people, this and that, and it didn't happen. Actually, in fact, Europe without borders helped to keep everybody in their country, interestingly. But let's say America would never dare, because it has this unusual feeling that everybody wants to move to this country, then what America could do is and what everybody could do is to say, at least let's have a world without borders for anybody who makes over a certain amount of money that is a qualified professional. Because if at least the qualified professionals or leaders could move without borders, then a lot of that know-how would move, and then your country and Argentina and everyone else's country will get a lot of professionals that are well-trained to sit at the other end of the negotiating table and negotiate in those conditions.
Just 2 minutes left, so I'll get just 1 minute. Monique, you wanted to add something?
Just 1 second on one part of his question, which was on aid, and when aid is decided for a country, or because of a natural catastrophe, or because of something, the delay between the announcement and the moment it arrives. And this is very, very true. And also, this is accompanied by the fact that the person that you want to help, which is, in fine, the grandmother that tried to put her 2 granddaughters in a school and be educated, is completely forgotten. And these people, the grandmother and the daughters, don't have any way to recess or to say, look, I've been forgotten.
No voice.
And this is one of the very big issues also.
Just very briefly, in certain cases, not in all cases, you can use technology to disintermediate the corrupting body. So I'll just give you 2 examples. One is kiva.org,
Yeah.
K-I-V-A, which is an example where in that particular application of microfinance lending, they've been able to disintermediate, because sometimes when you send the money through the government or through some government agency, suddenly, magically, half is missing, as an example. But in this case, we can sit here, or you can sit in the UK or Spain and donate directly to that entrepreneur who's sitting in Uganda, say, and they can receive that money, work on their particular social enterprise, and then send back the loan payment. And in this country, Donors Choose also arose from that sense, because in this country, a lot of concern on the part of donors and parents about the money disappearing in the school administration. So a different kind of disintermediation there. And in Donors Choose, the money goes directly from the donor directly to the teacher. In fact, the money doesn't even go there because the concern is sending the money. So actually, the money is donated to Donors Choose. They buy the stuff in bulk and then send the stuff to the teacher. So the use of technology to disintermediate traditional corrupt actors, I think, is an important trend.
Yeah.
You have one more minute. I just want to come back to a couple of things that have been said, and in particular, the passion of social entrepreneurs. So social entrepreneurs are passionate, and they just need to step back and apply the same disciplines, understand their theory of change that has been said, that they apply in the business that made them successful enough to have some free time and money to go and be a social entrepreneur. So often that is, what am I good at and what am I not good at, and I should contract out. And so sometimes a social entrepreneur is good at something good enough that they can go to a small community in Africa or in Latin America or wherever, in the United States, wherever it is that and they can do it on their own. But mostly not. Mostly they're just passionate, they'll go in and do it, and it won't be sustainable. And so there are places where a good partner would be, this is going to sound self-serving, but an NGO who's in that community already, who's been there for 30 years or 40 years. And we've seen increasingly, we have a mining company in South Africa who has partnered with us to do HIV and AIDS education because their workforce was dying. And so they didn't know the community, we knew the community. Their interest was primarily their business, a sustainable workforce. And I love this example about the emergency. We're very active ourselves in Haiti, Pakistan, all the emergencies. And we've just had a large retailer come to us, particularly focused in Latin America, and say, look, you guys know how to do an emergency. You know how to find the grandmother who can't fight through the line, who can't carry the bag from the UN truck, et cetera, et cetera. You know how to find her. We know how to get the food there, and we know and proper nutrition and so on. So why don't we do the supply chain, and we can actually make some money at it, them, not us, and you guys organize it all on the ground. Well, that's a complementary skill. They know their skill is the supply chain. They know our skill is the community. So social entrepreneurs need to take the disciplines that made them successful and don't ditch those when you decide to go do the social side.
Nancy, you had one final thought, yeah?
Well, just sometimes the social entrepreneurs, in the case that I was talking about in Tanzania, they're not successful. I mean, they're not older, they're not successful. This is what they've chosen to do with their lives. And that helps them make the connection with the local residents, because they can say, if you work with me, I've gotten $1 million for this first round, but I'm not, in order to get to the next round and help your aunt's village, we need to accomplish A, B, C. And so there's a way to, if you're genuine, if you're not someone that has excess wealth, but you have the backing of investors, to really bring the local people into your business model and have them benefit from working with you and eventually kind of be able to scale it on their own.
Of course, ladies and gentlemen, we see we have so many things to talk about, and we can only touch on them so much when we have a time limit like this. But I want to thank the panel. Please, a round of applause for them. And of course, the beauty of this summit is the chance for you to all interact and continue the debate and discussions outside the panels as well. So please do keep the debate going, and of course, all our distinguished guests are here as well for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.